first contact with Ferric 7, had always prided himself on logical thinking. As a member of the Vorthok species, his crystalline neural pathways processed information with mathematical precision. Fear, as humans called it, was an inefficient, emotional response that his people had evolved beyond millennia ago. Or so he believed until the day he stood beside humans and learned what real terror meant. The research station Omega-9 floated peacefully in the void between star systems, a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Representatives from 12 different civilizations worked together, studying the remnants of an ancient war that had scarred this region of space eons ago. Crix served as the lead xenarchaeologist, his sensitive crystalline fingers perfect for handling delicate artifacts from the long-dead civilization they called the Architect's Dot. The humans fascinated him most among his colleagues. They were so contradictory, so unpredictable. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human xenobiologist, would spend hours discussing the philosophical implications of extinct species, his eyes bright with curiosity. Commander Sarah Chen moved with military precision, yet showed remarkable gentleness when handling fragile specimens. Young Zara, barely past her species' maturity threshold, could solve engineering problems that stumped beings 3 times her age. What puzzled Crix most was their emotional responses. Other species showed fear through logical defensive mechanisms. The Kelthari would release warning pheromones. The Brigaxians would shift their hide coloration to camouflage patterns. But humans displayed this peculiar phenomenon they called courage, which seemed to be fear transformed into action rather than paralysis. The morning of the attack began like any other. Crix was examining a peculiar crystalline matrix in Lab 7, when the station's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from the dead zone. Commander Chen's voice echoed through the station's communication system, crisp and professional. All stations, we have multiple unknown contacts approaching. Size and configuration suggest automated vessels. All non-essential personnel report to designated safe zones. Dr. Webb appeared beside Crix, his human face displaying that familiar expression of controlled concern. Ancient automated defenses, perhaps. The architects were known for their war machines. Before Crix could respond, the first impact shook the station. Emergency lights bathed everything in crimson as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Through the reinforced viewports, Crix saw them, massive mechanical constructs emerging from the void like nightmares given form. Each vessel stretched over 2 kilometers in length, bristling with weapon arrays that pulsed with malevolent energy. The harvesters had awakened. Crix's people had legends about the harvesters, ancient war machines programmed to eliminate any technology that might threaten their creators. They had supposedly destroyed the architect's civilization itself, in a final act of misguided protection. Now, after sleeping for 10,000 years, human activity had triggered their awakening protocols. The second wave of attacks struck with devastating precision. Sections of the station vented atmosphere into space as hull breaches opened like wounds. Crix's crystalline structure resonated with terror frequencies as he processed the tactical situation. 57 beings aboard the station, 3 harvester dreadnoughts. No weapons capable of penetrating their ancient armor. Mathematical probability of survival less than 0.01%. He expected panic. He expected the logical response of immediate evacuation. Instead, he witnessed something that defied every xenopsychological model in his database. Commander Chen appeared in the lab, her human features set in grim determination. "We're not running," she announced to the assembled beings from various species. "We can't outrun them, and they'll follow us to populated systems. We make our stand here. Commander Crix's voice harmonized with confusion. The logical action is retreat. These are harvesters. They have destroyed civilizations. Sarah Chen looked at him with those strange human eyes, and Crix saw something that made his crystalline matrix sing with frequencies he didn't recognize. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was fear transformed into something else entirely. Maybe, she said quietly, but I've got 56 beings under my protection. That makes this our fight, not theirs. What followed challenged everything Crix understood about combat psychology. The humans didn't prepare for battle like warriors. They prepared like gardeners protecting their crops, like parents defending their young, like teachers safeguarding their students. Dr. Webb, a peaceful researcher who'd never held a weapon, began modifying scientific equipment into defensive systems. Zara, barely out of childhood, crawled through maintenance shafts to reinforce structural weak points. The harvesters launched their assault with mechanical precision. Swarms of smaller constructs, each the size of a fighter craft, poured from the dreadnoughts like angry insects. Their energy weapons carved through the station's outer defenses as if they were mere inconveniences. Crix found himself in the command center, watching the tactical display with growing horror. The humans moved through the station with purpose that seemed to border on insanity. They weren't just fighting, they were protecting. Every action was calculated not for their own survival, but for the survival of others. Commander Chen coordinated the defense from the bridge while simultaneously sealing bulkheads to protect civilian areas. Dr. Webb used his knowledge of ancient technology to identify harvester weak points, sharing targeting data even as weapons fire scorched the air around him. Zara maintained life support systems under impossible conditions, her small human hands flying over controls while explosions shook the station. The first boarding pods breached the hull after 20 minutes of bombardment. The creatures that emerged weren't truly alive. They were extensions of the harvester consciousness. Mechanical spiders, the size of ground vehicles, with cutting tools that could slice through titanium. Each one was programmed with 10,000 years of combat experience. Crix watched in fascination as the humans met them in the corridors. They had no natural weapons, no thick hides or venomous claws. They were soft, fragile beings who should have been overwhelmed in seconds. Instead, they fought with a ferocity that made the ancient war machines pause in their advance. Commander Chen moved through the battle like a force of nature. When her rifle ran out of ammunition, she used improvised weapons. When those failed, she used her bare hands and that inexplicable human quality called determination. Dr. Webb, the gentle scientist, became something else entirely when he saw injured colleagues. He didn't just fight the mechanical invaders, he hunted them. But it was young Zara who truly demonstrated the terrifying nature of human determination. Cut off from the main group, trapped in engineering with 2 injured Kelthari researchers, she made a choice that defied every survival instinct. She manually triggered a plasma conduit overload, turning her location into a weapon that destroyed 6 boarding pods at once. Crix expected her to die in the explosion. Instead, she emerged from the inferno with burned hands and singed hair, carrying both injured aliens to safety. When asked later how she'd survived, she simply said, "Humans are hard to kill when we're protecting our friends." The battle lasted for hours. By any logical calculation, they should have been overwhelmed in the first 30 minutes. The harvesters possessed superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and millennia of combat programming. Yet somehow, impossibly, the defenders held As the tide began to turn, Crix realized what he was witnessing. The humans weren't winning because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped. They were winning because they had chosen to win. Not for themselves, but for everyone else. When the last harvester construct fell silent in the corridors, found Commander Chen in the medical bay, helping treat the wounded. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes held the same gentle determination he'd seen from the beginning. "How?" he asked, his crystalline voice resonating with frequencies of pure confusion. "How did you know you could succeed against such odds?" Sarah Chen looked at the beings around them, Kilthari Brigaxians, Vorthok, humans, and 6 other species, all working together to heal and help each other. "We didn't know," she said quietly. "We just knew we couldn't live with ourselves. If we didn't try." That night, as temporary repairs held the station together, Crix began to understand. Fear, as humans experienced it, wasn't the absence of courage. It was the presence of something precious worth protecting. The terror he'd witnessed wasn't in the humans themselves, it was in their willingness to become whatever they needed to become. When someone else was in danger, he realized that humans weren't feared throughout the galaxy because they were the strongest species. They were feared because when faced with impossible odds, when logic dictated retreat, when survival instincts screamed for flight, humans looked at those they'd chosen to protect and made a different choice. They chose to stand. And somehow, impossibly, they usually won. The truth about human terror. The aftermath of the Harvester attack should have been celebration. But Crix 7 found himself more confused than ever. 3 days had passed since the last mechanical invader fell silent, yet the humans continued their inexplicable behavior. While other species focused on repairs and evacuation planning, the humans investigated something else entirely. Commander Chen stood before the holographic display in the main briefing room, her scarred hands manipulating tactical data with practiced precision. The assembled beings from various species listened as she outlined what their sensors had discovered during the battle. The harvesters weren't acting alone, she announced, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality that transformed fear into determination. Our deep scans detected a massive construct approximately 47,000 kilometers from our position. Analysis suggests it's the primary control hub for this entire region's automated defense network. Crix's crystalline structure hummed with what his people would call logical concern, but what humans termed dread. "Commander, surely evacuation remains our primary objective. We have wounded beings, damaged systems, and now knowledge of a threat beyond our capabilities." Dr. Webb, still bearing burns from his encounters with harvester constructs, stepped forward. "Crix, we intercepted communication bursts during the attack. The harvesters transmitted the location of every inhabited system within 50 light-years to that control hub. If we don't stop it, those worlds will face the same assault we did." The mathematical implications crystallized in Crix's consciousness. 17 inhabited systems, billions of beings who had no knowledge of the approaching threat, no time to evacuate, no defenses capable of standing against ancient war machines that had destroyed their own creators. What happened next would forever change Crix's understanding of human psychology. Other species began discussing evacuation protocols, communication with their respective governments, and diplomatic solutions. The humans began planning an attack. "The construct is heavily fortified," Zara reported, her young human features serious beyond her years. "But it's also ancient. I've identified potential weak points in the energy distribution network." Crix watched in fascination as the human planning process unfolded. They didn't debate whether the mission was possible. They assumed it was and worked backward from success. Every obstacle became a problem to solve rather than a reason to retreat. Commander, the Kelthari representative, spoke through that translated as profound concern. Your species numbers only 12 aboard this station. The construct likely contains thousands of defensive systems. This is not courage. This is suicide. Sarah Chen turned to address the assembled beings, and Crix saw something in her expression that made his crystalline neural pathways resonate with new frequencies. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was fear transformed into something terrifyingly beautiful. Maybe it is suicide, she said quietly. But those systems contain the locations of worlds filled with beings who can't defend themselves. My species has a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good beings to do nothing. We can't do nothing. The Bragaxian delegation began discussing evacuation procedures. The Kelthari calculated survival probabilities. The Zarathi contemplated diplomatic approaches to ancient artificial intelligence. The humans began loading weapons. Crix found himself following Dr. Webb to the station's modified shuttle bay, where 3 human craft were being prepared for what logic insisted was a suicide mission. Doctor, he harmonized carefully, I must understand. Your species shows every physiological indicator of fear: elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline production, heightened neural activity. Yet you proceed as if these responses don't exist. Marcus Webb paused in his equipment check, his human eyes meeting Crix's crystalline sensors. Crix, fear doesn't make us weak. It tells us what's important. Right now, I'm terrified, and I'm not terrified for myself. I'm terrified for every child on those 17 worlds who will die if we don't stop this thing. The revelation struck Crix like a resonance cascade. Human fear wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was a strength to harness. They didn't fight despite being afraid. They fought because they were afraid for others. The assault team consisted of 15 beings, 12 humans and 3 volunteers from other species who had been unable to process the mathematical impossibility of success. Crix found himself among them, though he couldn't logically explain his decision. The Harvester construct was a monument to ancient paranoia. 30 kilometers of crystalline and metallic architecture floating in the void, bristling with weapons that had once destroyed stellar civilizations. As their shuttles approached, automated defenses began tracking their movement with mechanical precision. Remember, Commander Chun's voice carried through the communication system with calm authority. We're not here to defeat this thing in open combat. We're here to turn off the lights and walk away. The infiltration began with controlled chaos. Human tactical doctrine, Crix learned, involved creating so many simultaneous problems that even advanced artificial intelligence couldn't process optimal responses. Zara led a team through maintenance corridors, while Dr. Webb's group targeted the construct's sensor arrays. Commander Chen took the direct approach, assaulting the primary command center, while everyone else created distractions. Asterisk. What followed was 4 hours of impossible tactical decisions and inexplicable human behavior. When faced with automated defense systems that could calculate firing solutions faster than biological reflexes, the humans did something the ancient AI couldn't predict. They made intentionally suboptimal choices that created opportunities through sheer unpredictability. Crix found himself separated from the main group, trapped in a corridor with 2 humans and 6 harvester constructs. Logic dictated immediate surrender or retreat. The humans began discussing which one would create the biggest distraction while the others continued the mission. "I'll draw them off," announced Private Torres, a young human barely past military training age. "Give you time to reach the control hub." Before anyone could respond, she was running towards certain death, her weapon firing at enemies she couldn't possibly defeat. The Harvester constructs followed her, their programming prioritizing the immediate threat over strategic positioning. Dr. Webb grabbed Crix's crystalline arm and pulled him toward their objective. "Don't let her sacrifice be meaningless," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that Crix's species associated with profound grief and absolute determination. They found Commander Chen in the construct's command center, her hands covered in burns. From interfacing with alien technology, the ancient control systems were responding to her inputs, but slowly, as if the AI was fighting every command. "It's learning our tactics," she reported without looking up from the crystalline interface, "adapting to our approach patterns. We have maybe 10 minutes before it develops effective countermeasures." That's when Crix truly understood human terror. It wasn't the fear of death, it was the fear of failure when others depended on your success. Commander Chun's hands were literally burning as she forced the alien systems to respond. But she continued working because billions of beings across 17 star systems needed her to succeed. The shutdown sequence began just as the construct's defenses reached optimal efficiency. Ancient weapons that could crack planets powered down one by one. Communication arrays that had been preparing to guide harvester fleets went silent. The massive artificial intelligence that had orchestrated the destruction of its own creators finally, permanently, slept. They made it back to their shuttles with 37 seconds to spare, before the construct's automated self-destruction protocols activated. Of the 15 beings who had attempted the infiltration, 11 returned. 4 humans had chosen to stay behind, ensuring others could escape. As they watched the ancient construct consume itself in brilliant fire, Crix finally understood what made humans truly terrifying to the rest of the galaxy. It wasn't their weapons or their tactics or their refusal to acknowledge impossible odds. It was their willingness to look at strangers, beings they'd never met, from species they barely understood, and decide that these strangers' lives were worth dying for. Back aboard Research Station Omeganine, as repairs continued and evacuation plans proceeded, Crix updated his xenopsychological reports. He added a new classification for human behavior: irrationally protective. They were beings who became more dangerous as the threat to others increased, who found strength in fear rather than weakness, who chose cooperation over survival when the stakes were high enough. He realized that humans weren't feared because they were monsters. They were feared because they were gentle beings who could become monsters when someone needed protection. The galaxy's greatest predators killed for food or territory or dominance. Humans killed for love. That distinction, Crix concluded in his report, made them the most terrifying species in known space. Not because they were evil, but because they were good in ways that defied logic, mathematics, and self-preservation. When someone asked Crix years later why he'd chosen to join that impossible mission, he could only harmonize a frequency that roughly translated to human laughter. Because, he said, when humans decide something is worth protecting, the universe tends to rearrange itself around their decision. I wanted to see how they'd make the impossible happen this time. The answer, he'd learned, was simple: together, one choice at a time, with fear as fuel rather than obstacle. That's how humans had always made the impossible happen. That's how they always would. Asterisk.